Okay, so the eagle-eyed among you may think, well, oh, I don't think she's dressed the same. She hasn't got her hair quite the same. Looks the same, but the candles aren't lit. This is because this is 5 days later, and I've come back to it and thought Saturday morning, I think I can explain what I did in that video better. So this is later. But I really wanted to kind of get into the nuts and bolts of why we do need to care about these enantiomers and the chirality. So let's start with the fact that you may have already come into contact with this, with carvone. So carvone, for example, the plus and minus act differently in caraway and spearmint. If you smell the carvone in each, you get a minty smell and a caraway smell. It's the carvone that's doing it, okay? And this kind of partly answers a question that I always think about when I'm thinking about olfaction generally. When we inhale a molecule, it goes to a piece of tissue on the back of the olfactory bulb, which has around, it's about the size of a dime and has around about 100,000 receptors. And then those send messages along nerves to different parts of the brain to instruct them to do lots of things. But fundamentally, that 100,000 receptors helps us to understand and to interpret about 3 million different fragrances. And well, how does it do that? Well, enantiomers are part of that the chirality goes, oh, we've got a left-handed approach on this one, we've got a right-handed approach on this one. This left-hand one will send it to that sort of part of the brain that will interpret it as minty. This one will send it to that part of the brain that will interpret it as caraway, or kind of like a fennelly kind of smell, aniseedy kind of smell. So that also obviously happens within the body, and this kind of partly explains why essential oils don't have side effects. They have many main effects, because the body will go, okay, this one receptor can interact with a left-handed and right-handed, so it can do two things instead of one thing. And then also it will go, that alpha-pinene molecule can interact with this receptor in the body and that receptor in the body. So we have like this concentration of combinations and permutations of all the different things that can happen within the body. So it's lots of different layers involved. So for example, if we were to say, right, I want to analyze what positive alpha-pinene can do for bacteria against what it can do for viruses, I can tell you that the positive alpha-pinene is a much better bactericidal agent, and the negative one is a much better antiviral agent. And likewise, if you wanted to work with an essential oil that contains alpha-pinene to work with somebody who has osteoarthritis, then you definitely would want to go for the positive enantiomer, the positive alpha-pinene, because that one is shown to have tremendous anti-inflammatory effects, but also to affect the enzyme that involves MMPs, which are matrix metalloproteinases. Can't believe I got that right first time. Which are essentially like scissors on your bone, and they are what's responsible for breaking down cartilage and breaking down the bone in osteoarthritis. So we do want to inhibit those. The negative alpha-pinene kind of does it, but nowhere near as well. So it's kind of like a 9 out of 10 versus a 2 out of 10 response that you're getting by using the wrong frankincense essential oil. So does that mean that the Arabian frankincense is superior because it's got this positive alpha-pinene, and so therefore it would be better for osteoarthritis? Well, if we're thinking about osteoarthritis, yes, it does. But if we're thinking about bronchitis, then you might be better going for the African one, because that has a predominantly negative alpha-pinene profile, which we know is antiviral and particularly really good for bronchitis. So it really is Like apples and oranges, they're completely different things. And so if we continue on this trajectory of saying, right, well, they're both Boswellia sacra, well, we could read a textbook and go, right, frankincense for arthritis, maybe go for Boswellia carterii because it's the cheaper option, usually it is more inexpensive, then think, well, this isn't working anywhere near as well as it should be because we've picked the wrong one. And likewise, we might look in a textbook and say, well, I'm going to choose Boswellia sacra because there's loads and loads of evidence for this particular condition. Well, which sacra from where? You just can't tell. So essentially, what we're doing by grouping them together from a purely selfish, like therapeutic point of view, is we're muddying 150 years worth of phytotherapeutical evidence, aren't we? It's just daft. However, if you were to retain the binomial nomenclature and say, right, Boswellia carterii, we know that every time that we look at a clinical trial that says Boswellia carterii can do that, we can go, okay, Boswellia carterii can do that. I'm happy with that. And likewise, if we say we can see that Boswellia sacra can do that, okay, I know what oil that I'm dealing with. And so we know that the results of what we're reading are pertinent to the essential oil that we're using. Now, I do recognise there is a fundamental problem with saying that this essential oil comes from a tree that doesn't exist. But actually, you know what, that's semantics. It is coming from the same botanical that it has always come from, and not just one botanical, a series of botanicals. And so it doesn't really matter, because the evidence that we have for Boswellia carterii not only tells us what that version of the tree does, but it also tells us that it doesn't really matter if we've got Boswellia ferreriana in there or occulta, which happens, because that's always been the case and that's always been the profile, and we don't really know that much about what Boswellia occulta can do yet. And so if we kind of lose all that information, you know, it's like saying, I only want to use my grandmother's perfect recipe for making apple pie. You know, that is the perfect recipe. If you muddy the water with the research, you just don't know, do you?